Hey guys, welcome back to this another episode of ProgramHub. Today in this episode, we're gonna talk about how can you become a web developer. So if you have just got started and you don't know anything about programming if you don't know anything like how can you get started with becoming a web developer, what things you should start learning and to the very basic minimum. So we'll be talking about each and everything that you should be learning to becoming a web developer. Okay. So let's get started, and I'll be trying to get you each and every information, each and every teeny and tiny bits of information that you should know before becoming a web developer, so that your roadmap towards becoming a web developer becomes much more easier than ever before. Okay, so we'll be just getting started over here. So first thing, you want to become a web developer. Okay, so to becoming a web developer, what should be the first thing that you should keep in account? What should be the first thing that you should know before becoming a web developer? The first thing that I recommend it to you is to get some information about what internet is. Okay, now you might be thinking that yeah, we know about internet. No, it's not the usual mode of internet. What's the working part of internet? How does the internet functions? So that is something that you should be knowing. The first thing that I recommend it to you to know is what is internet. So get into this process of knowing what is internet. Okay, by that I'm trying to mean that what is an internet, how does it functions, like how is all the websites working onto the internet. Now this episode is not going to be about what is internet, and I'm not going to explain you each and every topic inside it, but yeah, I'm trying to get you all those questions, because as it said, the most important thing in everyone's life is not the answers but the questions. So if you have the right questions to ask in your life, you can get to the right answer. So we'll be talking about the questions today. I'm not going to explain you each and everything over here, but yes, these will be the most foundational things. If you can go through these tiny bits of information, it will be very good for you for becoming a web developer. So the first thing you should know is what is an internet. Okay, getting to the next thing. The next question that you should be learning about it is what is HTTP. Now HTTP is a protocol that is being used all over the internet, all over the websites. So this is one protocol that you should be studying about. So just get an idea about what is HTTP, and following to that there are much more things. So I'll be recommending it to you that also get an ideology about what is FTP, what is www, as well as what is an IP address and how does it works. Okay, so these would be the very basic fundamentals about internet that you should be learning. Next to that, we'll be having something more as what is domain name. Okay, so for example, if you want to get to know what is domain name is just www.google.com. this is a domain name. Okay, so try to study what is in domain name and much into the depth. Next to that, you should study is what is hosting. Okay, now hosting is the place on the internet where you keep up the files for the other people to access it. So also try to study what is hosting. There are various different hosting like solutions available nowadays. That's GoDaddy, Bluehost, and so on. So there are various different hosting that we'll be talking in depth into one of the episodes coming up further. But just try to get through these all terms very quickly, because you'll be talking about it, you'll be coming up with all these terms again and again inside web development. Okay, so the next thing that I recommended to you to learn is DNS and how does it works. Okay, so how does it works, try to get through this also something. Okay, what is DNS and how does it works. Now I won't recommend it to you that get with this answer. At to the very minimum level of basis, you don't need this, but yeah, if you can get with this question done, this will be really helpful for you into the coming future. Okay, so this tries to get you through the some of the most basic examples and basic things as what internet is and how does it functions. So once you get through this, now let's get further to the very basic things of the web development. Okay, usually people try to just tell you that get started with the basics, But yeah, there is a methodology of getting through the basics. So if you don't have a clear understanding what domain name is, what is in hosting, what is in www, what is HTTP, so if you don't have an understanding about this, you'll be having very hard time learning the web development part. Okay, now when we consider web development, so there is a complete stack that is called as a basic stack. So over here, what I call as the basic stack, and this is something that everyone must learn. The first part of the basic stack is obviously the HTML, and you must have heard about it. Okay, so HTML is the first stack that you should be learning into this. Now over here into the HTML part, if we try to consider the things that you should be learning, so the very first thing over here, if we try to, okay, before that, I'll just give you a detail about what are the other things over here inside the basic things that you should be learning. The second thing that you should be learning over here is CSS. Okay, so that is CSS. And the third thing that you'll be learning over here as a basic thing would be JavaScript. Okay, so you must have heard about all these three things. Okay, these are just scripting languages that we'll be using to create web pages around the internet. So coming out to the HTML part. Now what is HTML? HTML is the content part of your website, of any website. Okay, it is a content, and we can also say it's the what part. Okay, by what I'm trying to mean that it's the bare minimum thing that, for example, you want to show some images, you want to show some text, so that is the content. Okay, for example, let me take an example over here, that you have a butterfly. Okay, you have a butterfly, you want to show a butterfly on your web page. Okay, bear with my drawing, not that good, but yeah, just so let us suppose we have this butterfly that we want to display on our web page. So to display this butterfly, a basic skeleton of this butterfly, you'll be requiring the use of HTML. So that is what HTML does. And getting more further to that, what should you learn into HTML? The next thing that you should learn into HTML, and the first thing would be the basic HTML concepts. And by that, I'm trying to mean that tags. Okay, so try to learn the most basic tags of HTML. After that, you can learn forms, okay, tables. Okay, so you should learn forms, tables, and so on things, then divisions, sections, and so on things. Okay, so these will be serving you as the most basic fundamental towards learning HTML. And after this, one more thing you can learn into HTML that I won't recommend you add to the very basic minimum, that would be semantics. Okay, so semantics of if we call semantics of HTML, so this is one thing over here into HTML that is, we can say, and most latest and upgraded part of the HTML. So there are different tags evolving into the semantics, so you should be learning that even. But if at the very basic moment of time you don't want to learn those all things, that's fine. You can just get through with the basics and the basic tags and the elements and everything. So that would be the basic part of the HTML that you should be learning. Okay, do not skip this all parts. Okay, getting more further to the CSS. Okay, let's get to the CSS. Now if we consider the CSS part over here, so for the CSS part, what is CSS? Let's try to understand what is an CSS over here. Okay, so if we talk about CSS is basically, now you have your butterfly over here. Okay, so you have a butterfly over here, and if you want to style your butterfly, for example, what color it should look. Okay, for example, there should be some red color on her wings. Okay, then what color more should be there? Okay, she should have, okay, some bluish tint onto her center body. Okay, so these things, these styling effects that we apply to our HTML content, because now we have written the content. So if you want a text to look yellow into color, if you want the background to change to some image or some color, so that all styling part is done by CSS over here. Okay, so that's the reason you should be studying CSS. Now getting ahead, so the styling part. Okay, now into the CSS, what should you study? What are the bare minimum things that you should be studying? The first thing that you should study is the CSS properties. Okay, what properties you can use so that you can change some styles, some text, you can center the text, you can style the text, you can change the background. So all those things, that should be the bare minimum things that you should be studying. Then you should study how can you call different elements inside your HTML file. So you should study the class, ID, name, and these all things, the calling function, calling methodologies, how can you call these all things. Next to that, what I recommended to you, that you should be studying some models and layouts. Okay, so models and layouts are basically the way you try to lay your HTML content. Okay, so there are different models and different layouts into CSS that you can use. So most basically we use the grid layout, or we use the box model, and there are even more than these, but there are some just I'm trying to get you through. So try to learn the models, different models and layout design patterns that we'll be using into CSS. So try to get yourself through these all things. Now coming to the next part, that is the JavaScript part. Now we are done with drawing our butterfly. We have colored it, we have applied the styling over here. But now our butterfly doesn't has some life over here. There should be some action, there should be some movement into it. So to apply the action part, okay, what we call as the action part. So if you want your butterfly to have some action, something like it should give you some movement. Okay, so that thing over here is done by JavaScript, the action part. Okay, so action part, that means, for example, onto your website, on your web page, you have a button. So that clicking on that button, there should be something happening over there. It should either submit a data, it should either give a pop-up that, yeah, these all fields are remaining. So you might have seen onto the web pages, whenever you fill a form and there is either of the one thing that's not filled properly, that is a mandatory field. So if you don't fill that, instantly you get a pop-up or a message over there, please fill this form. Okay, this is a required function into the form. Okay, so these all things, these functionalities, these actions, what we see happening over there onto the web pages is done by JavaScript. So to get your things into action, that is done by JavaScript. Also we can say that JavaScript is the part that applies the intelligence. Okay, so this is the part that applies the intelligence on your web pages, because without this, without the JavaScript, your page is just a piece of, like we can say, a drawing. There is nothing sense into it. But when you use JavaScript, you try to put on some intelligence, some action, some things that are trying to happen over there. So you go through all those things. Now coming to the JavaScript, the very first thing that you should be learning is the basics of the JavaScript. So by basics, I'm trying to mean that you should be learning about variables and those all things. So that would be the serving as you the most basic things. Then after that, you should be studying out DOM manipulation. Now one of the very major topics into the JavaScript, DOM manipulation. So this is really important, by the way, DOM manipulation. So one of the most important things, because using DOM manipulation, you can change things, you can make things happen inside your web pages. For example, you can change the images instantaneously using the DOM manipulation. So that's a complete different topic over here, and that's, by the way, a very extensive topic, but you should be studying that. This is very important inside the JavaScript. Next to that, there are some advanced concepts. So there are some advanced concepts that you should be studying. So into the advanced concepts, if I try to get you through some of the basics ones, so that could be hoisting, then there is scope, then prototype, strict, and promises, etc. So these are some the advanced concepts of JavaScript. And by the way, for the advanced concepts of JavaScript, we do have a course on Udemy that is by Anthony Alessia. Okay, so that is by Anthony Alessia, and that is by far one of the best courses that I've ever taken on Udemy for JavaScript. So this one course tries to get you through the most weirdest parts of the JavaScript and how you can learn these most difficult concepts of JavaScript. So that is regarding that. But if you even don't get through this course, that's okay. And by the way, if you want to just have a look over to this course, I'll link it down into the description below. You can just go over there and try to have a look. But you can also learn that from anywhere else. There are various another sources available. So these things would be the most basic things that I would recommend it to you at the very minimum level of being a web developer. So if you're ready with these all things, that could serve you as a very fundamental route to becoming a web developer. So with this, you're done with getting through the basics of the web developer. Okay. Now after this, the next thing that I recommended to you would be getting to the backend part. Okay. Now backend part is a large part once again. Okay. But over here, if we try to gather out some information, see, right now I'm not focusing that you should become a front-end developer or you should become a back-end developer. I'm just considering you as a web developer. And these all things, what I'm considering right now, what I'm trying to explain it to you right now into your roadmap, is serving as the basic fundamentals for you being a web developer. Okay, so if you are thinking that I don't want to be a front-end developer, why should I learn HTML, CSS and JavaScript? Or rather, I don't want to be a back-end developer, so why should I study the back-end part? So I just don't want to get through that. See, what I recommended to everyone, try to have some taste of everything first, and then try to choose what serves you as the best. For example, if you even don't know what backend is all about, so how can you choose between the front end and the back end? So at least try to get through the most minimum things before you even go ahead to choose like what serves you as the best. So first of all, you try to learn some basics of the front end, some basics of the back end, and then try to figure out what serves you as the best. Are you good onto the designing side or are you good onto the development side? So before getting a taste and understanding and a knowledge of anything, don't go ahead and choose anything. Okay, that's one of the most biggest issues, or we can say mistakes, that every person does ever, because they don't know what's the backend part and they go ahead and say that okay, I want to be a backend developer. So you don't even know what's in backend, you don't even know what's in front end. So try to get through each and everything. And the reason why I'm trying to say to you that learn the front end and the back end at to the very basic minimum reason is that, for example, let's suppose you are a front end developer. I totally understand that, but you need to know what should be the links that you should leave so that it can be pulled by a backend developer further ahead, so that he can develop the process for the website. And if you're an backend developer, you should know what should be the tags, what are the tags, and what are the elements that I need to work on with into the backend part as well, because sometimes you need to have an understanding of the front end also when you're trying to draw up the entire process for the backend. So that's the reason why I'm trying to get you through the most basics of the front end and the backend as well. Okay, now considering the backend part, we have got some languages over here that you should be studying. The most basic minimum is the PHP. Okay, so the most basic we have PHP. Next we have JavaScript. Okay, there are even much more than PHP and JavaScript over here. Essentially, if we talk about JavaScript, so there is a frame, or we can say there is a stack that we use mostly, that is Node.js plus Express.js. So this is a stack that we use in JavaScript for building the backend part using JavaScript. Now other than that, we can also have Python can be used. There is a Django framework that we use inside Python. Okay, so also if you are using, let's suppose if you are developing websites using the .NET framework, so for .NET framework you'll be requiring to learn C#. Then we can also have Java over here. Java can even be used as in backend, into the backend language. Then you can also learn Ruby. So these are much more different things over here, but the two I most basically recommend to you, the most basic two would be PHP and JavaScript. Even if you don't learn the JavaScript as of now, that would be fine for you, but you should be learning PHP at to the very basic minimum, because at to a certain moment of time, like even if you will be working around with some pre-built CMS, like for example WordPress or Webflow or anything it might be, so you'll be working around with PHP. So try to get a very basic overview and the basic concepts of the PHP at to the very minimum, okay, so that you can proceed and try to gather up some knowledge that what serves you as the best thing, okay. And there are different over here, different languages, like you can also use Python. If you're interested into Python, you can also use that as a backend language, so that is being used also, and one of the most popular languages. But what I recommended to you at to the very basic minimum is PHP, okay. So now we have done with the front end part and the back end part. Now there's one thing that's really essential over here, that is the database, okay. So the one thing now that's really essential is database. Now why database? Now let's try to understand that. If you have a website, your website will have some data, okay. For example, if it is a ticket booking website, or if it is a simple registration website, so your registration information will be stored somewhere. So to store that information will be requiring database. Now database is completely of two different types. One, we have SQL database, and the other one that we have is a NoSQL database, okay. So into the SQL database we have Oracle, then we have MySQL, we have PostgreSQL, okay. Considering the NoSQL part, we have got MongoDB, we have Firebase. So these are some of the database systems that we have, but the one that I most importantly recommended to you is to go with, and the mostly that what we use over here is MySQL and PostgreSQL. That is one of the most used and most popular at to the very minimum basics. So you don't have to learn everything into the database now. The only few things that you have to learn over here that I'll recommend it to you. And see, to inside the SQL, if we are considering SQL over here, so inside SQL, all the database systems that we have over here right now is using the same language that is called as the standard query language. That is what SQL stands for, okay. So that is standard query language. So all these different systems, it might be PostgreSQL or Oracle or MySQL or any another kind of, and there are different MariaDB and any another you might be using. So all basically use the same language, that is the standard query language. So into the standard query language, there are few things that you should be studying. The one that I will be recommending it to you at the very basic minimum is the CRUD operations, okay. So try to learn what are CRUD operations. Now CRUD operations over here tries to mean that create, read, update and delete, okay. So you can create data, you can read data, you can update data, you can delete data. So that is the most basic operation inside the database. Also you should learn how to create tables and how to enter or insert data. That is basically creating data part, okay. So there are few things that you should be studying about is what is primary key, what is foreign key, okay. So these all things you should be studying over here, that like these all would be helping you to get a greater insight and a more knowledge about database. So these few concepts about, try to learn few basic concepts about database. And one thing that I would really recommend it to you to learn over here would be ER diagram, okay. Now what is an ER diagram? Let's try to understand what is an ER diagram. So ER diagram is entity relationship diagram. So it shows what data is interacting with what another data. So how are the data inside the entire database connected to each other? So that is basically ER diagram. So if you try to learn those things, and if you try to design one ER diagram for your entire website, so that can serve you as the how data would process inside the entire backend of the website. And if you just try to get through some of the basic things like what is the front end, what is the backend, let me get it through to you very quickly. For example, let us suppose we have a user who is on his PC or a machine. Let us suppose that's in Mac. Now he's connected to an client right now. Okay, sorry, not client, to an server right now. Okay, so we have an user right now who is on a movie ticket booking website. Okay, let's suppose he's on movie ticket booking website. Okay, and we have a server that is doing all the process into the backend. For example, he chooses to book F16, okay, seat number F16 for an XYZ movie. Okay, so he's choosing to book F16 of XYZ movie. So what will happen, this data over here, this data will now travel to the server. Okay, this data is going to travel to the server, and the server will check over here that whether this data, or that means whether this seat is available or not right now. Because when he's booking that seat, along with him there are much more users, there are many more users who's trying to book the same seat. So the server will check whether this seat is available for this XYZ movie or not. So if that's available, what he will do, they will book the ticket for that user, and they will send a response message that yes, this seat is now booked for you. Okay, so that is what the process of the entire handling and the management part is done by the server or the backend. Onto the server there resides one thing that is called as the backend. Okay, and onto the front end, the user side, we have something that is called as the front end. Okay, so what is visible to the user, that is called as the front end. What is working inside the background is called as the backend. So these are the two basic essential entities over here. So if you're trying to get through the web development part, so this can be a very good roadmap for you for becoming a web developer. Now I've tried to gather out all the information as much as possible over here for you, and if you ask me what would be the resources from where we can learn, so there might be two resources that I would like to give it to you. So there is one, if we talk about resources, the first one would be W3 Schools. That's a website. You can just search on the Google, you'll get this website, W3 Schools. It has got a documentation for almost everything that I have just now talked about. Also there's one that I really like, that is Mozilla documentations. Okay, so you can go to Mozilla developers documentations. There you can find a lot of information over there. And by the way, the link to these both I'll be linking down into the description below. You can also check that out over there. And by the way, for your information right now, we are coming up with a bootcamp that will be a web developer bootcamp. So if you want to learn the basics of the web developer bootcamp, will be starting very soon over here, and the information will be out very soon. So please subscribe to our channel so that you get the information very soon, and also try to follow us on our Instagram. So that is @ProgramHub. So now one more thing that I would like to recommend it to you, that if you want to get through any of the courses online, so there's one course that I specifically recommend for you for becoming a web developer. So there's one course on Udemy that's by Dr. Angela Yu, that is called as the Complete 2021 Web Developer Bootcamp. Okay, so that you can get easily by $10, and by the way, the link is down into the description. You can go ahead and try to just have a look onto that course. And by the way, this is one of the most amazing courses that you can ever get, because it has got completely 35 sections. And if we just have a look inside the sections over here, you can see that we have the front end part, introduction to HTML, intermediate HTML, then introduction to CSS, then we have got Bootstrap. Bootstrap is one of the frameworks that we use for building much more advanced and modern looks into the front end part. So getting ahead over there, we also have JavaScript, we have the DOM, then DOM manipulation, then we also have jQuery. jQuery is not much used nowadays, but yeah, we have an introduction to jQuery as well inside this bootcamp. Then we have got Web Development Bootcamp, Introduction to Node.js, Express.js, APIs, Git, GitHub, and version controlling. So that's a different part all to around. We'll be having a different session for that. But inside the course, you have got much of the everything. Also, we have the databases, SQL, MongoDB, Mongoose, and everything over here, and how to deploy your website. So this can be a really good course for you, and this costs you around just $10 or something. So if you want to get in through an online course, this would be the one course that I would be recommending it to you for becoming a web developer. And by the way, this is the complete roadmap for becoming a web developer. So if you want to become a web developer, this is what I recommend it to you. Get through it, get started with it. And if you have any more doubts, any more questions, feel free to ask that into the comments below, or you can Instagram message me on @ProgramHub. So I'm available over there and I'll be helping you out over there. So that's it for the day. Meet you into the next episode. Till then, goodbye.